Meanwhile, I know, Asa, you've been watching. You watched the whole of the Trump speech, and you wanted to kind of unpack some of the details in
Yeah, read the
these
tea
political.
leaves.
Yeah, exactly. If that's at all possible when you're dealing with him. Uh, yeah, tell us what you've been following this week.
Yeah, that's right, Nora. As you discussed with Helena earlier, of course, US President Donald Trump has signed a ceasefire deal between Israel and the Palestinian resistance, which went into effect on Friday. And as part of this deal, the Palestinian negotiators insisted on Trump personally announcing the end of the war and the withdrawal of Israeli troops from at least some of Gaza. That was really a kind of sticking point for them. So on Monday, as part of this process, Trump actually flew into occupied Palestine to give a speech at the Knesset, which of course is Israel's parliament, to seal the deal and announce what he claimed, as we saw in that clip earlier, was the end of 3,000 years of war and a new age of peace. And yeah, for my sins, I watched the entire speech. I want to take us through some of the most. I've got a few clips and some of the most notable aspects of it. But in summary, it was, as you would expect, a fawning tribute to Israel's genocidal leaders, and they were doing this kind of thing they do in Congress in the U.S., where it's kind of a State of the Union speech where they gave multiple applauses to him, and there was all lots of mutual congratulations. And it was partly a kind of rambling train of consciousness, or it seemed like it was. It seemed to be going off script sometimes. And some of the audience certainly looked a little bit uncomfortable at times as well. But be that as it may, it was, there were certainly some significant things said. How much to believe is another question. When and that, regardless of Trump or not, that's always the case when it comes to U.S. leaders, Western political leaders in general, political leaders in general. Full stop. But first of all, Trump, on his way to flying into Tel Aviv, he talked to the press pack on Air Force One, and he said several things of significance there too that I want to go through. So the first was that he was asked by one of the journalists about as we talked about earlier in the stream, the potential involvement of former British Prime Minister Tony Blair in the so-called Board of Peace, which is supposed to oversee the reconstruction of Gaza in later stages of the ceasefire. And this was Trump's remark.
That Tony would be popular with all, because I just don't know that. And I like Tony. I've always liked Tony, but I want to find out that he's an acceptable choice.
Yeah, so he's kind of walking back the talk of Blair as a kind of neo-colonial governor of Gaza. So he's saying, well, I've got to see if he's acceptable to people in the region. Of course, Blair is wildly unpopular in the region due to his role as a war criminal during the 2003 invasion of Iraq, and as well as his decades of support for Israeli crimes. But Trump has to deal with these leaders of Qatar, UAE, and other regional vassals. There was another comment he made when he was asked about disagreements over his plan and who will now govern the Gaza Strip.
I wanted to ask you about your conversations with world leaders today. You said that everybody is unified over your plan, but we heard from President Sisi calling for a two-state solution and independent Palestinians.
So you're talking about a different plan. I'm talking about something very much different. We're talking about rebuilding Gaza. I'm not talking about single state or double state or two state. We're talking about the rebuilding of Gaza.
What's the road ahead for governing
Well,
Gaza?
we're going to have to see. I mean, a lot of people like the one-state solution. Some people like a two-state solution. So we'll have to see. I haven't commented on that.
How do you see bridging that gap? Because you have the Arab countries.
At some point, I'll decide what I think is right, but I'd be in coordination with other states and other countries.
I find that quite interesting. Ali, what did you make of that comment about, well, some people like one state, some people like two state?
It's interesting. He said that at the beginning of his first administration. Remember, there was quite a lot of fanfare about that. And of course, I'm happy to him say that. I mean, he might not mean what I mean by a one-state solution, because we know that, the Zionists want a one-state solution with no Palestinians.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that's going to really upset, the European Union Zionists who are recognizing the non-existent phantasmic Palestinian state in order to cement the idea of a so-called two-state solution, which they see as the only way to save Israel. But I think once you start talking about a one-state solution, once you allow that discussion to happen, then that doesn't mean it's going to go the way Donald Trump wants it to go. I think what's clear now with the shifts of opinion, the sea change in opinion that we're seeing in the United States and around the world, is that there's no obvious reason why a vast majority of Americans should be committed to a Jewish supremacist ethnocracy. They're going to say, well, yeah, the obvious solution is everyone gets equal rights and the same protections under the law and the same, one person, one vote. That's going to be the logical solution to the vast majority of people. It's only the committed fanatics who believe that Israeli Jews deserve special and better rights than Palestinians who are going to be committed to, the Zionist version. So he doesn't want to commit to a two-state solution because his Zionist bankrollers, who we're going to talk about, don't want him to. But at the same time, it opens up the space for us to start to move beyond the fantasy of a two-state solution.
Yeah. Well, there was one more thing that he said on Air Force One that was of particular significance. So even more notable was what he said about Hamas governing Gaza in the interim period. Asked about reports this week that we talked about earlier, that Hamas fighters and Hamas sort of police force have seized the window of opportunity provided by the Israeli withdrawal to fight back against Israel-armed criminal looting gangs that have been starving Palestinians during the Gaza genocide. Trump said the following.
Hamas rearming, instituting themselves as a Palestinian police force, shooting rivals. What is your message to Hamas?
We are standing because they do want to stop the problems, and they've been open about it, and we gave them approval for a period of time.
So, that's significant. He claimed there that, we gave them approval for a period of time to act as a police force. And if he's, you could, it was a little hard to hear over the engine, but what he also said was, well, that it's understandable they want to stop the problems. So it's always a bit hard to tell what Trump is referring to, but he's presumably referring to the looting gangs. Of course, Trump doesn't mention the fact that looting gangs have been systematically armed and given air support by Israel. Now, that, of course, was significant because the 20-point plan that you discussed with Helena earlier, Trump released it last month, and it calls on all Palestinian factions to give up their weapons. However, the agreement that was actually signed last week doesn't mention anything at all about disarmament. So, I don't know. To me, that comment from Trump, it seems to be almost coming off the top of his head. But then again, it also seems to be him simply recognizing the reality of what is happening on the ground. However, it has to be said, a few days after he made that comment on Tuesday this week, after the prisoner exchange had happened, Trump kind of walked it back a bit, and he said that, quote, if they don't disarm, we will disarm them, and that will happen quickly and perhaps violently. So, again, it's the typical thing of Trump of kind of swinging from one extreme to the other.
Yeah, I'm curious to know if John thinks that the United States has the ability to disarm Hamas quickly and perhaps violently.
I do not.
I'm surprised.
I think we have 700 and what day? 734 days of evidence of one of the most brutal military campaigns that anybody can remember failed completely and utterly failed. I don't see this disarming track is I think yeah
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
concerned about it because it's not going to happen, and it gives Israel a yeah
Yeah, I mean, it's Israel, like you said, Ali, it's Israel demanding that Hamas do what it itself has failed to do in not just 2 years, but in decades of the Palestinian resistance movements. And
Why should the resistance
right,
disarm? The
help the
colonial
genocidal, yeah,
occupier should
yeah,
disarm. The
right,
entity that perpetrates the crime of crimes, genocide, should
yeah,
disarm and be disarmed. But
exactly,
the whole so-called international community discourse endorsed by the whole West and by the UN Secretary General is that the Palestinians are the problem.
yeah,
The Palestinians are sick and radical. You know, they need to be de radicalized
right,
because they refuse to live under a brutal colonial system of apartheid that is willing to mass murder them if they don't submit to being non humans on their own land.
right,
That's not who needs to be de radicalized. It's the Israeli public that needs to be de-radicalized, that overwhelmingly supported this genocide and overwhelmingly participated in it. As
that's
Haim
right,
Brashit Jabna told us, was it 2 weeks ago,
yeah,
this is the most democratic genocide in history
yeah,
because it required mass participation from Israelis, and with few exceptions, they went along with it. There
yeah,
were a few dissenting voices, but very few.
yeah. And just the
Qassam will give
fact
in.
that, yeah,
Sorry, go ahead, Nora.
I was just going to say, just the fact that the Palestinians who have been the recipients of this state violence and this apartheid and 2 years of genocide were expected to negotiate for their own for the end of their genocide, just in at the at the fundamental level, just the insipid, like, perverse nature of that in itself, let alone now the expectation and the demands by the genocidal perpetrators to give up their arm. I mean, yeah, it's I don't know. It just continues to, like, make me feel like I'm crazy. Like, this is no other people, in this current world have had to negotiate the end of their own genocide, and yet here we are. Sorry, John, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that Qassam will give up their weapons to the Palestinian National Army, which they effectively are operating as and have been from Gaza for the past 2 decades. So I think you'll see that in the negotiations that come forward, a principled negotiation by Hamas on behalf of Qassam that says when there is statehood, and not just like Helena said, not just an idea of a state, but a state that has borders and independence and sovereignty, that state's weapons will be Qassam's weapons. But until that
Except
point,
John, you know, the so-called international community, the countries that rushed forward with their fake recognitions, France, the UK, Canada, you know, those countries, they all said, oh, a demilitarized Palestinian state. So they anticipated that. So they don't even want this imaginary state to be able to defend itself. So they don't want Palestinians to resist. And then when this magical state somehow comes into existence through, I don't know what, asking the Israelis nicely, because that always works, then it won't be able to defend itself either.
Right.
yeah, those recognitions were to the right of Netanyahu, pretty much. I mean, from that position to say that the state has to disarm, and the prime minister of this country saying that it had to be a Zionist Palestinian state, a disarmed Zionist Palestinian state. I mean, those Yeah, we covered that well on this show. Those recognitions were an embarrassment to international diplomatic trade craft.
Yeah, I think the Canadian comment was the most telling and most Trump-like, actually. Like, yeah, that is what they want, a Zionist Palestinian state.
They
But
just say it
that's
openly
the
now.
two-state solution is a Zionist solution, because the whole point of it is, Palestinians don't need a little itty-bitty state on a part of Palestine. Palestinians would like to return to an exercise of self-determination in all of Palestine, which is their right. The only reason to have a two-state solution, and this is why it was conceived, is so that you can have Jewish supremacy on at least part of Palestine. And the argument between Western liberal Zionists and the Likudnik right wing in the West and in Israel is, what's the best way to save Israel? This is two competing Zionist visions. The Emmanuel Macron, Keir Starmer, Mark Carney vision is, we love Israel so much, the only way to save Israel is to allow a little Palestinian statelet that will keep Israel intact as a Jewish state with a Jewish majority, so that we can pretend it's also a democracy.
Yeah.
That's the liberal vision of Zionism. The one that's dominant in the US and in Israel is, no, we don't need to worry about that. We can expel the Palestinians. We can just take their land and make them live either as slaves, or expel them. Tell them, you don't want to live here with no rights, then you're welcome to leave. And we're not going to pretend we care about democracy. So it's important to understand that that's why Palestinians aren't allowed to be part of these conversations. That's when Emmanuel Macron and the Saudis convene a so-called conference on the two-state solution. It's without Palestinians, because this isn't about Palestinians. This is about what's the best way to save Israel.
Yeah.
And Palestinians have no interest in that. Their interest is in restoring their rights. And restoring their rights is incompatible with Zionism, which is a racist, supremacist ideology that negates their existence and whose logic is genocide. Because if you say that Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish state, then it logically follows that Israel has a right to eliminate the non-Jewish majority in the country. Otherwise, how else can it be a Jewish state? So the genocide is actually Israel exercising its right to exist as a Jewish state. And if you support Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state, you must support genocide, because there is no other way to assure it in a situation where non-Jews are the majority in Palestine. They were before 1948. There was a period through ethnic cleansing where they became the minority. Now they are the majority again. Nature, natural population growth has restored the situation that existed before 1948. And the only way, in South Africa, you had the same discussion. How can we preserve white supremacy? By retrenching, shrinking the white supremacist state a bit, by giving up the Bantustans, but will still maintain white supremacy overall. It's the same thing now, and nobody should be, bamboozled by it.
I think very few people comparatively are at this point after this last 2 years of genocide. I think Israel has shown what it is to the whole world. So I think that these kind of conferences are trying to protect that, because they saw the delegitimization of Israel being showing up in every young person around the world and otherwise who they are.
Yeah. I mean, what was that famous quote, Ali? Was it from Arnon Sofer, who said, in order to maintain...
I have that quote, actually. And actually, something Trump said in his speech it
recalled
evoked
it.
that. It
Yeah.
evoked
Yeah.
it. I don't know if he's smart enough to
It's one of the
quote it,
clearest,
but it
the
evoked
clearest
it.
descriptions of Zionism. If we
I
want to maintain our Jewish state, we have to kill and kill and kill.
Yeah, I have that clip. So, shall we bite the bullet and dive into what Trump said in the Knesset? He, well, we saw the clip earlier with Helena where, he did. I won't. We don't need to play that again. But he started off. He declared the end of the war. And then he spent a long time thanking people in the room.
Yeah.
Pete Hegseth, Jared Kushner, Steve Witkoff, all of his people basically who'd helped him negotiate the deal. And he also, the first clip is he lauded his attack on Iran in June, and this was one of the key themes of his speech, I would argue, which was he claimed he had degraded the country's nuclear energy program, and he said the following.
They took a big hit, didn't they? Didn't they take a big hit? Boy, oh boy. They got hit from one side, from the other. And it would be great if we could make a peace deal with them. And I think that's big. Would you be happy with that? Wouldn't it be nice, I think?
And then he said, of course, but first we've got to get Russia done. So he's saying to Witkoff that we've got to go and get a deal with Russia as well. And later in the speech, he also described the JCPOA deal signed with Iran by the Obama administration as a disastrous deal. And he claimed that now Iran wants to make a deal, even if they say they don't. And he said to Iran, we're ready when you are. So there's that.
The world wanted peace and Israel wanted peace. Everybody did. Everybody did. And what a victory it's been, right? What a victory it's been. If you would have gone on for 3-4 more years, keep fighting, it was getting bad. It was getting heated. The timing of this is brilliant. And I said, Bibi, you're going to be remembered for this far more than if you kept this thing going, kill. It would be it would not be the same. And I just want to congratulate you for having the courage to say, that's it, we've won, and now let's enjoy our lives.
So, he's trying to publicly say this is the end of it. And as we saw in the clip earlier, he's even saying it's the end of 3,000 years. Some people say 500 years of war. So he's saying it's the end of it. And yet the reality on the ground, of course, as we've seen, is very different. The kill comment there that we saw, I mean, that really struck me because... So the quote from Arnon Sofer that you mentioned, Nora, Arnon Sofer, for viewers and listeners who don't know, was an important advisor to the Israeli Prime Minister at the time, back in 2004, Ariel Sharon, and it was of the time of the tactical withdrawal of Israeli settlers from within the Gaza Strip, and this was a very similar process to what you mentioned, Ali, of the Bantustans. Of the kind of in South Africa, the kind of retrenchment of the white supremacist system in South Africa by strategically withdrawing from the so-called homelands, the so-called Bantu homelands, as the white supremacist regime called it. And this was a kind of similar thing to what the Israelis did. And it was all about engineering Jewish supremacy in Palestine overall. And what Arnon Sofer said to the Jerusalem Post in this infamous quote, which you've quoted in the past quite a few times, Ali, was when 2.5 million. This, and remember, this is him speaking in 2004 when the population was much less than this. When 2.5 million people live in a closed-off Gaza, it's going to be a human catastrophe. Those people will become even bigger animals than they are today. The pressure at the border will be awful. It's going to be a terrible war. So if we want to remain alive, we'll have to kill and kill and kill all day, every day. And of course, that's what they did.
Yeah.
That quote, Asa, and he goes on, and it's just horrible what he says. He says, we have to kill and kill and kill all day, every day. And he says, the only thing I worry about, do you have the quote there in front of you? But he says, the only thing I worry about is that the boys who are going to do the killing come back, and are able to live normal lives. It's just something grotesque like that. But I think the significance of this interview by Arnon Sofer, which really laid out the logic of Zionism plainly and without any adornment. But also, I think it tells us that the genocide in Gaza was preordained. It was going to happen. From the Zionist perspective, they had to do it. The question was not if, it was when. It was what would be the right moment. And this is important because you have these revisionist narratives that people are trying to put in place, that the Palestinian resistance is responsible for the genocide, as if you can ever blame a people for their own genocide. An occupied, colonized people is never responsible for the atrocities and crimes of the colonial occupier. Algerians weren't responsible for French savagery. Kenyans weren't responsible for British savagery. Native Americans and indigenous people in Canada were not responsible. There was nothing they did that forced the European colonizers to try to exterminate them. So we mustn't allow people to impose that victim-blaming narrative on Palestinians either, ever. But the point here is that genocide has to be part of the plan if your goal is an ethno-state in a country where the vast majority of people, or the majority of people, are not from the ethnic group that is going to be the privileged class in that state.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't have the rest of the article right in front of me, but it was certainly. I think you pretty much quoted him more or less verbatim there. He was worried about the mental health, essentially, of Israeli soldiers who were doing the killing, and he predicted that correctly, because there has reportedly been a kind of mental health crisis amongst Israeli soldiers. Nothing compared to Palestinians in Gaza, of course, but there has been a phenomenon of soldiers being unable to return to re-enlist and return to the battlefield.
Well, it's like Golda Meir saying, I will never forgive the Arabs for making us kill their children, or, something like completely psycho
obscene,
like that. Yeah.
obscene stuff.
Completely.
Well, Trump concluded his speech by asking President Herzog. Israel, of course, has a kind of European-style president who has some political powers, but less than the prime minister, and that's the President Isaac Herzog, who is a racist in his own right, and of course infamously said there's no such thing as innocent, at the beginning of the genocide, said there's no such thing as uninvolved innocent Palestinians in Gaza, and it's the whole society responsible. And that was actually cited by South Africa in its ICJ case against Israel for genocide. But Trump asked Herzog at the end of his speech to pardon Netanyahu for the corruption charges he's facing. And his final line was, "I love Israel, I'm with you all the way." I'll spare you those clips. But possibly the most revealing part of the speech, which has been talked a lot about on social media, was when he publicly lauded his campaign donor, Miriam Adelson, of course, as well as her late husband, the casino mogul Sheldon Adelson. Now, Miriam Adelson, remember, has donated, last year alone, $100 million to Trump's election campaign, and to the previous two election campaigns before that one. I didn't get the figure for that, but I'm sure it's in the similar sort of ranges, certainly tens of millions of dollars. And that was more last year than Elon Musk, and it was quite similar. The clip I'm about to show you is quite similar, actually, Ali, to that clip we watched earlier, that you played earlier, of Trump saying that the Emirati official Sheikh Mansour had unlimited cash. He's kind of just saying what comes into his head when he sees people. So we're going to play this clip of what he said to Adelson in full, because it's pretty astonishing.
But every president for decades said, we're going to do it. The difference is I kept my promise and officially recognized the capital of Israel and moved the American embassy to Jerusalem. Isn't that right, Miriam? Look at Miriam. She's back there. Stand up, Miriam. Stand up. Miriam and Sheldon would come into the office. They'd call me. He'd call me. I think they had more trips to the White House than anybody else I can think of. Look at her sitting there so innocently. She's got 60 billion in the bank, 60 billion. And I think she's saying no more. And she loves Israel, but she loves it, and they would come in, and her husband was a very aggressive man, but I loved him. He was a very aggressive, very supportive of me. And he'd call up, can I come over and see you? I say, Sheldon, I'm the president of the United States. It doesn't work that way. He'd come in, we would do. But they were very responsible for so much, including getting me thinking about Golan Heights, which is probably one of the greatest things to ever happen to Israel. Miriam, stand up, please. She really is. I mean, she loves this country. She loves this country. Her and her husband are so incredible. We miss him so dearly. But I actually asked her, I'm going to get her in trouble with this, but I actually asked her once, I said, so Miriam, I know you love Israel. What do you love more, the United States or Israel? She refused to answer. That might mean Israel, I must say. We love you. Thank you, darling, for being here. That's a great honor. Great honor. She's a wonderful woman. She is a great woman. I've always stood for the people of this community, and I always will. I'll always be with you. I'm always going to be with you. I guess maybe something could happen to change my mind. Somebody that's really stupid gets into office and wants to do really bad things, but that's about it. And we don't think we're going to have that happen. I hope we're not going to have that happen. And this man is a good man right here. These two men are good men right here.
Oh my God, make it stop. $60 billion, and she like doesn't have the right, hairstyling creams, or I mean, she's like not using any moisturizer. Like I don't. Sorry, it's petty.
I can't help but laughing because everyone looks so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Didn't they? Like Miriam Adelson is going, sit down, stop making a fuss. But at the same time, she's trying to just grin through
She's
it.
putting it all out there. I mean, that was the Make America Great Again, America First president, just telling us all openly, well, what we already knew, but it's coming from the horse's mouth, that the top financiers of his campaign, the top Israel lobbyists in the world, could effectively march into the White House anytime they wanted and dictate his policy. That's exactly what he just said. He wasn't even thinking about the Golan Heights.
He'd never heard of
it. They made him think
No.
about it, and then he gave it.
No, that's a good point, John. Like he said, oh yeah, it got me thinking about the Golan Heights for the first time. But Nora, you've just pointed out her dress had custom yellow ribbons on it. I didn't notice that.
Tamara pointed that out. I didn't even notice.
Okay.
I could
sure
hardly
it cost
look at
a
her.
fortune.
Like it's just,
I'm sure. It
Yeah,
cost a
I'm sure it did.
hideous.
But like, it's I don't know. I could probably write an article about that clip, to be honest. But no, I mean, it's like you said. He's boasting of how the sausage is made. Like, this is how
the veneers are gone.
Yeah, like he just, which is why everyone seems to look a little, that everyone's smiling through it, but they seem to look a bit uncomfortable that he's just saying it I mean, what is more to say, really? He's just saying it there. And also he accuses her not only of being I was kind of flabbergasted when I saw it, because it was, even for Trump, it was pretty frank. I mean, he accused her of being Israel first as well, or Israel only.
Yeah, it wasn't even
really.
dual loyalty. It was like singular loyalty.
And how does that play with his base? I mean, will they see that? What will they think? I mean, already on the right, there is this opening of unprecedented opening of space to criticize Israel. And it really comes from this notion that Israel has too much influence in the United States. It's not based on solidarity with the Palestinians as such, although there is some of that. Some right-wing people have spoken with empathy for Palestinians, but a lot of it is sort of motivated by this idea that our politicians are controlled by various interests and lobbies, not least of them the Israel lobby. And it seems he's only fueling that criticism, perhaps deliberately. Who knows? Maybe
Yeah, I mean,
he's
I wonder how calculated some of this is.
yeah. The other thing, Asa, that you mentioned regarding Trump calling on President Isaac Herzog, the president of Israel, to pardon Netanyahu. I mean, on its face, that just seems so crass. Like, why would he want that? But Max Blumenthal actually commented on this in a way that made me think. It's like that might be the only way to make sure that Israel doesn't go back to war, because as long as Netanyahu has these corruption charges hanging over him, then he has to stay in office forever. And then he has to keep wars going forever. So maybe that's like a harm reduction measure, pardoning him for these corruption charges and getting him out of office. That might be the only way to get him to agree to leave office. But then, of course, he will be a private individual and he needs to be arrested and taken to The Hague or to any other country that puts him on trial for genocide under universal jurisdiction.
Yeah. It's pretty astonishing stuff. Well, I mean, I think maybe the last thing to say on the Adelsons is just that if you want to read more about Sheldon and Miriam Adelson, I wrote an article about the pro-Israel empire of Sheldon Adelson soon after he passed away in 2021, and how it was being handed over to via this sort of complicated series of family trusts and whatnot to Miriam Adelson, who I haven't seen the more recent figures, but at the time was said to be by far the richest person in Israel. So, and he was of course a casino billionaire who made his money in Las Vegas, owned several newspapers and whatnot, and Miriam Adelson now owns all of that and continues the same sort of malign influence campaign now.
Worst people on earth. Thanks for that, Asa. Let's take a look at the website.
One more
ahead.
thing.
Yes.
Can we do one more very
please.
quick thing?
Yes.
And that's just this
sorry.
clip. Yeah, I almost forgot, but I want to show it. It's very quick. This clip of the press briefing at the European Union in Brussels. Let's run it.
In repeating several times that Russia should repay for the reconstruction of Ukraine, do you believe Israel should repay for the reconstruction of Gaza, since they have destroyed almost all the Strip and the civilian infrastructures? Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriele. It's definitely an interesting question on which I would not have any comment at this stage.
Yeah, she's waiting to get her marching orders, essentially. It seems like. I mean, Trump did mention reconstruction of Gaza in his speech in the Knesset, and he said, it's going to be good for Israel too, BB.
Yeah. But they're just like the sheer, I think...
shock. They've never even thought about it.
Well, it just like there's no pretense anymore that their policy is driven by any kind of principles. The EU that held itself up as the world's repository of values. It's just so clear. As Helena Cobban said, they're so eager to return to business as usual and whitewash Israel and shield it from the consequences. They're talking about confiscating Russian assets that were held in European banks, and this might include private assets, in order to give restitution to Ukraine. And they haven't even thought about whether Israel should repay for the destruction that it has caused as part of a genocide. It's just so disgusting.